So I did technology integration in the classroom versus not, and my name is Taylor Comanduris. I'm going to take you through my presentation and speak briefly over some of the stuff that I conducted during my research. For my abstract, for my research paper, I chose to look at the technology integration in the classroom versus not. I cross-related it with the issues of COVID-19 and lack of classroom attendance. I toyed with technology integration such as time of day, multiple subjects, and a variety of students. My findings were interesting and at times confusing, but ultimately my results led me to much more than I ever anticipated about my students. My keywords are technology, integration, and COVID-19. For my introduction, while in our PLC or professional learning communities, teachers take the time to plan, discuss, and analyze their students' work by looking at data. Data is derived from CFAs, or also known as Common Formative Assessments, or our CSAs, which are also known as Common Summative Assessments. A big question that is asked is how are we not only teaching the concept, but also how are teachers reinforcing it to where our students can apply whatever the concept may be? That is somewhat of a loaded question in my opinion. That is why I started to question whether or not we were able to use technology to our full advantage in the classroom or if we were hindering our students. We are encouraged but not enforced to have technology embedded into our morning and afternoon station rotations. This is what made me curious about wanting to know more about having technology in our classrooms versus not. Each morning we begin our day with STEM activities to jog our students' minds and get them warmed up. After we shift to our ELAR half of the day. We have from 8:25 a.m. to 10 a.m. to where there is no technology at their own fingertips, but there is at mine. We may use the projector, but that is the extent of it. They don't have the opportunity to get their hands on technology until morning station rotations. When at stations, they have the option to participate in district-wide apps that are available through Clever, such as ExactPath, Reading Eggs, Prodigy, or Epic. All of which these apps are research-based and based off of their data that is assessed during our beginning of year district-wide testing. It is all geared towards each individual student and their learning needs. It is also broken down into the TEKS and standards for our grade level. Of course, my other thought is having technology integration is that we are taking away from the social skills that we need to function as civilized humans in a basic society. After our ELAR block in the morning, my students have another break without technology, from 11:10 to 1:30. During that time, my students have lunch, recess, a bathroom break, then specials of some sort. Specials are anything from PE, music, makerspace, or art, none of which typically have technology. Later, after all of this has happened, we then return to class as a whole and are expected to have an advisory period with students. This now brings us to our math block in the last hour and 45 minutes of our day. It is also at this time that we have afternoon math station rotations, which again is not enforced but encouraged to have technology. Now with all of this laid out, this was something else that made me curious, and that is if I could integrate technology and maybe help fill some of the gaps for all of my students who have missed school due to COVID-19 or just in general, would technology integration actually benefit us educators and students, or would it hinder us? That is the question. I did have 4 or 5 different literature reviews that I did participate and gather my resources and information from. So I did have a study that was mostly concentrating on classroom technology integration, but with K through 12 students, and that is creatively possible with the integration within the classroom. I also had another study that shifted its focus and was mainly about technology integration and the factors that can lead to poor use of technology in the classroom. My third study was mostly focusing on the technology integration and how it is used in education innovation for enhancement of the students' learning. It says over the past few years, technology has become a major tool used in just about every career, and has provided educators with valuable resources to support teaching and learning, which I also do believe in. Then there was, when my fourth study, it was during this study, was primarily relating to the teacher side of technology, along with the experience of their students regarding technology in the classroom. The journal also stated that the conceptual framework was Bruner's theory of instruction, which describes the instruction should increase students' ability to understand, transform, and transfer what they are learning. And lastly, the last study I had was this. It was primarily related to creativity and technology enhanced learning in the classroom. They stated, in addition to creativity, technology is also an important aspect of today's classrooms. Digital technology has been suggested to make a distinct contribution to fostering students' creativity by providing new tools and environments for learning to be creative and learning about being creative. For my methodology and data, the methodological approach that I chose for my research was mixed methods. I chose this approach based off of my anecdotal notes, such as me taking tally marks in the database table that I created. I also kept sticky notes while I was working with small groups at my table during stations for both reading and math station rotations. And as for my quantitative approach, I then turned my tally marks into a data, which was led to percentages. Having my percentages to look at will help others look at the data and see the effects of behavior during stations with and without technology integrations. My study participants, I specifically chose 10 students from my second grade general education classroom, 5 of which are male and 5 of which are female. As of now, I do not have any 504 or SPED students, but there are some that are in the testing process. For my data collection, I created a Google spreadsheet table that had my students' names in the far left corner and to the right. I ended up taking out their names and I just labeled them student 1 through 10. Then I had open boxes and I left my tally marks. And I made my anecdotal notes. And then underneath that, I gave the percentages. So I had 2 different modes of instruction, which was no technology, and then the other one was technology integration. So row 12, which you can see in my actual paper, shows in the left-hand column that reading had negative behavior during stations. Then row 13 on the left-hand side had math with negative behaviors during stations. Still continuing with my data for this research, there are 2 methods of station rotations. The first being no integration of technology with reading and math stations. The second is integration of technology with reading and math stations. I collected data over each method, 5 days each with a total of 10 days. If I noticed over the course of the station rotations that the students were off task, they received a tally mark next to their name for that day. There are 2 separate groups of tally marks for which the students, due to there being 2 different times of table collections, which were reading and math station rotations. I processed this data by looking at the table I created and focusing on the rows 11 through 13. Also, 11 through 13 are the only table that I included because of names and so forth. So these rows were provided with the percentages of negative behavior during my reading and math stations, along with the type of method for that day. With the higher, just to make note, with the higher percentage, that was the more negative behavior, and then we're wanting lower negative behavior. So I would say anything under 30% was doing really well. So at the end of the day, I reviewed my tally marks and notes and that had been taken during the stations for both reading and math. I also made sure to check the sticky notes in my small group table if I had any missing data. I used software through Google Sheets and was able to keep all the data in line and neat during this process. I typed out a statistical test that I used in correlation because I am seeing how behavior is affected and correlated to the type of integration during station rotations. I chose this method because it is best for me to keep track of my students' integrations and behaviors. My biggest weakness was having math in the afternoon after a block of unstructured time. I feel as if it will affect my negative behavior during math station rotations, considering it is in the afternoon and not in the morning when they are fresh. My results and conclusions. So since the beginning of the school year and slowly adding in new reading and math stations, I have noticed an increase in negative student behavior. This made me question if the integration of technology in my station rotations would cause a decrease in negative behavior that I had been experiencing. To keep negative student behavior at a minimum during reading and math stations, teachers should be integrating the use of technology during such times. Based on the percentages, there was a lower rate of negative student behavior when technology was integrated into my station rotation. The results, by that, integrating technologies into station rotations, it will keep my students' negative behavior at a lower rate. A correlation between reading and math was that the percentage of the rate of negative student behavior was a decrease when technology was introduced. It met my expectations of having a decrease in the negative student behavior when technology was integrated into our day. Something that came as a surprise to me is how, with math, the negative behavior was much higher rate than reading rotations during majority of the time. I do believe that is because my math rotations are in the afternoon and that there is a block of unstructured time and students are tired after everything that has already happened during their day. The results of this study matters because it will allow me to intervene and integrate technology within my station rotation for my students' behavioral benefit. Since there is no exact research study that it was conducted, my results neither agree or disagree, but one study that I did review is that the teachers' views of integration technology was actually positive. I can agree that the integration technology into stations was a positive for me solely based on behavior. My findings were very different because my action research was very specifically focused on negative student behavior when technology is or is not integrated in station rotations. Due to there being no specific study that I have found, that my results do not confirm or challenge any existing theories. The practical implication for this action research is that technology should be integrated with technology. The results can tell us if the integration will benefit in an inclusion class, having an ELL student, or any other grade levels. The biggest limitation that I encountered was the length of time. With that being said, the results may be varied. My recommendation would be not to limit your students' creativity. Technology integration can be a positive movement in your classroom if used appropriately. You will notice a trend of negative behavior decrease during your stations. These are my references as listed below. Thank you for participating and have a great night.